I was 8 years old the night Halloween returned to our town. It was 1946, a year after the war had ended, though it still lived quietly in the corners of every home, in the empty chair at the supper table, in the folded uniforms tucked away in cedar chests, in the faces of the men who came home changed. But that October something different hung in the air. It wasn't the chill. It was permission to laugh again. For most of my childhood, Halloween had been something we only heard about in old stories. During the war, there were blackouts, windows covered with heavy curtains, porch lights turned off, everything dim and careful. Candy was rationed, sugar was scarce, and no one wanted to waste wax on carving jack-o'-lanterns. The only masks anyone wore were gas masks during drills at school. The grown-ups used to whisper, "We'll have Halloween again someday," the same way they said, "We'll have peace." That fall, it finally came true. I remember the first sign, a pumpkin sitting on the grocer's counter, round and fat and smelling like earth. Mr. Dillard, who ran the shop, said it had come all the way from Indiana. He charged too much for it, but nobody cared. It was the first pumpkin we'd seen in years. By the next week, there were more piled on porches, balanced on fence posts, waiting like bright orange promises. Mama helped me make my costume out of old ration sacks. She dyed them with leftover coffee grounds to make them look like burlap, then stitched 2 floppy ears on top of a cap. I was supposed to be a rabbit, though I looked more like a tired dog. My best friend Lila wore a dress her brother had brought home from Paris. Bright blue, patched and too big, but beautiful all the same. Every kid had a costume made from something that used to be something else. It was the only way we knew how to live back then, to make joy out of what was left. The town decided to turn the lights back on that night. Every porch glowed with candles. Every street shimmered with paper lanterns. It was as if someone had lifted a heavy blanket off our little world. We could see each other again. The veterans from the 3rd Battalion built a bonfire behind the church. They stacked up old crates from the supply depot, and when the fire caught, sparks flew high into the night, brighter than anything I'd ever seen. Some of the men stood off to the side, watching quietly, their faces lit by the flames. One of them was Mr. Carter, who lived across from us. He'd come home that summer, thinner, quieter, and afraid of sudden noises. But that night he smiled. When he heard us laughing, he didn't flinch. Trick or treat. We shouted at every door, even though most folks didn't have candy. Mrs. Hanley gave out slices of dried apple, wrapped in wax paper. The butcher handed out beef jerky. Someone even dropped a pencil into my bag. I thought it was magic. Every gift felt like treasure. And for the first time in years, the grown-ups came outside, too. They sat on porches, talked to each other, shared cider and stories. The air was full of life again. Wood smoke, laughter, the faint sound of Glenn Miller from someone's radio. Later that night, I saw something I'd never forget. Mr. Carter stood by his porch, holding a basket of taffy. His hand trembled a little as he held it out to me. "Don't be shy now," he said softly. "Haven't seen trick-or-treaters in a long time." I took a piece, thanked him, and ran off. But when I looked back, he was still standing there, looking at the jack-o'-lantern flickering on his steps. And for just a second, it looked like the flame inside. It wasn't candlelight at all. It was something inside him, glowing again. That was the night I learned Halloween wasn't really about ghosts or candy. It was about light, about daring to bring it back into the world after you've spent too long in the dark. The morning after that first Halloween, the whole town felt different. It wasn't just the candy wrappers blowing across the sidewalks or the smell of smoke still hanging in the air. It was something deeper, something quiet. For years we had all moved through our days like people walking through fog, careful not to hope too loudly. But after that night it was as if someone had opened every window at once. At church the next Sunday, people couldn't stop talking about it. Mrs. Hanley said it was the first time she'd seen her husband laugh since he came home from France. The school teacher, Miss Gray, announced she wanted to start a Halloween pageant next year to celebrate peace and the children's joy. Even Reverend Morton, who always warned about the devil's holiday, smiled and said, "Maybe light in a pumpkin is still light." That was the thing about those years. We were all relearning what it meant to be alive. The war had taken so much, not just the men and boys who never came home, but the ordinary rhythms of life, birthdays, picnics, laughter. Halloween had been the easiest thing to forget, but now it became the first thing we remembered. The town square was still covered in soot from the bonfire, and I remember sweeping it with my mother the next day. She hummed while she worked, a tune I didn't recognize. Later she told me it was something her brother used to sing before he left for the Pacific. I think that was the first time I saw her cry without hiding it. Lila and I spent the afternoon sorting our candy into piles, apples, jerky, and a few pieces of real chocolate someone must have saved from a ration book. We sat under the oak tree near the post office and talked about everything and nothing. Lila said she wanted to be a nurse someday to help people who'd been hurt. I told her I wanted to be a teacher, to tell stories about the way things used to be. We were just girls dreaming, but for the first time, dreaming didn't feel dangerous. A few weeks later, Mr. Carter started coming out more. He fixed a fence that had been leaning since before the war. He even started whistling when he worked, though sometimes he'd stop halfway, like the sound surprised him. One afternoon, Mama asked him to help repair our porch steps. He stayed for coffee afterward, and I remember him laughing, not politely, but freely, the kind of laugh that fills up a room. That was when I realized Halloween hadn't just woken up the children. It had stirred something in the grown-ups, too. By Thanksgiving, the town decided it would become a yearly tradition again. The mayor suggested a harvest parade with homemade costumes and prizes for the best jack-o'-lanterns. The local paper called it proof that peace had finally come home. But for those of us who lived it, it wasn't about parades or photographs. It was about small moments. About the way Mrs. Hanley left a candle burning on her porch every night, or how the black curtains that had once covered windows during air raids were finally taken down and turned into dresses and tablecloths. One evening near Christmas, I walked past Mr. Carter's house again. The jack-o'-lantern from October was still sitting on his porch, shrunken and wrinkled, but he hadn't thrown it away. When I asked him why, he said, "Because it's the first light that didn't scare me. I didn't understand it then, not fully. But now, so many years later, I think about that old pumpkin every autumn. I think about how something as simple as a candle in a hollow gourd could make a man believe in gentleness again. That first Halloween after the war wasn't just a night of costumes and laughter. It was the sound of a nation exhaling, the sound of mothers daring to let their children out after dark again, the sound of men rediscovering kindness in themselves. And though the years took away many things, people, places, even the old oak tree by the post office, that sound still lives somewhere deep inside me. It's there every time I smell smoke in the fall or hear the crunch of leaves under my feet. It's the sound of life returning, of hearts remembering how to beat in rhythm with joy again. I was well into my 30s before I realized just how much that Halloween meant, not just to me, but to everyone who lived through it. The years that followed were good ones, or at least busy enough to make us think so. The town grew, the streets were paved, and the little grocery store where I seen the first pumpkin of my childhood was replaced by a supermarket with bright neon lights. People called it progress. Still, every October, I caught myself looking for something that felt more real than the plastic masks and store-bought candy that came later. When I became a teacher, I used to tell my students about the Halloween of '46. At first, they'd laugh, thinking I was exaggerating. No candy, no costumes from a store, no flashlight-lit haunted houses. But I'd tell them about the ration sacks we dyed for costumes, about the smell of apples and wax and wood smoke, about how the night had felt like a prayer whispered into the cold. And they'd quiet down then, realizing it wasn't a story about monsters, but about people learning to smile again. That was the thing about our generation. We carried the silence of the war in our bones, the absences, the rationing, the waiting. So when we found joy, we didn't take it for granted. Even the smallest thing, a pumpkin glowing on a porch, a neighbor waving from across the street, felt like a victory. By the 1950s, Halloween had become something bigger again. Stores sold candy by the pound, and magazines printed glossy photos of children in shiny costumes. The radio played songs about spooks and spirits, and the parades grew louder each year. But I missed the hush of that first one, the stillness between footsteps, the soft crackle of a candle inside a pumpkin. One October afternoon, when my own daughter was 6, she came home from school, asking why we celebrated Halloween. I almost said something simple, for fun, but then I saw her looking at the decorations we'd hung together. Paper ghosts, orange crepe paper, a single pumpkin on the table. And I told her the truth. Because once, I said, we forgot how to smile. And one night we remembered. She didn't understand, not yet, but she would. Years later, when she became a mother herself, she told me that every Halloween she tried to make it feel like the one you talked about. She said it wasn't about the candy or the costumes. It was about making the world glow, even just a little, when it gets too dark. Sometimes when I walk through town now, I still see reminders of that old night. The churchyard where the veterans built the bonfire has been turned into a parking lot, but if you stand there on an autumn evening, you can almost smell the smoke. The old oak tree by the post office is gone, but the bench that replaced it has a plaque, "To those who remember the light." And every Halloween, when the sun goes down and the children begin their parade of ghosts and princesses and superheroes, I light a single candle in a small glass jar. I set it on the porch and watch it flicker through the night. To anyone else, it probably looks like just another decoration. But to me, it's something sacred, a little flame carried across decades, from the girl I was to the woman I became. We didn't have much that year, no fancy masks, no candy to spare. But we had something better, the courage to open our doors again. It's strange how memory works. The details fade, The faces, the words, even the shapes of the houses, but the feeling stays. The feeling of that October wind, that laughter that trembled at first and then grew stronger, the warmth of the candlelight dancing across our windows after so many years of darkness. Maybe that's why I still tell this story. Not because it's grand or dramatic, but because it's proof. Proof that even after years of fear, people can learn to trust the night again. Proof that a holiday about ghosts and shadows can become a celebration of life itself. Now I'm an old woman. The world outside my window doesn't look much like the one I grew up in. The fields that once stretched endlessly behind our town are filled with houses now. Neon lights hum where there used to be lanterns, and children carry plastic buckets instead of paper bags. They run from house to house in store-bought costumes that cost more than my mother used to spend in a month. Yet every year, when the end of October comes, I feel the same flutter in my chest that I did as a little girl in 1946. The night light came back. I live alone now in a small house at the edge of town. My husband passed some years ago. My daughter lives a few states away, and the old friends I once shared that magical night with are mostly gone. But when the leaves begin to turn and the air smells of smoke and sugar, I take out my old trunk from under the bed. Inside it, wrapped carefully in faded cloth, is a small lantern, the one my father used that first Halloween after the war. Its handle is rusted, its glass cracked in one corner, but when I strike a match and light it, the flame still burns steady. Every year I place it on my porch, and without fail, children stop to look at it, curious, maybe even a little confused. They don't know that the light inside that lantern has burned in one way or another for nearly 80 years. They don't know it started on a night when people didn't think joy would ever return. Sometimes the parents pause too. They smile politely, maybe wondering why an old woman keeps an antique lantern among all the glowing plastic pumpkins and battery lights. But now and then, one of them will ask, and I'll tell them. I'll tell them about the night when the world was finally quiet, when a whole town dared to hope again. I'll tell them about Mr. Carter, who learned to laugh, and Mrs. Hanley, who baked apple slices for children she didn't know, and my mother, who hummed a song for her brother, who never came home. And sometimes I'll see something in their faces, a flicker, a softness, a moment when they understand that the light isn't just decoration, it's remembrance, it's gratitude. A few years ago, my granddaughter called me on Halloween night. She and her little boy, my great-grandson, had just finished trick-or-treating. She said, "Grandma, we lit a candle on the porch tonight just like you do. That made me cry." Because that's how it works, isn't it? One light passed down from one heart to another until it belongs to everyone. I sometimes wonder what people will remember about these times when I'm gone. Maybe they won't remember names or dates, maybe not even stories like mine. But I hope I'll remember that there was a time, not so long ago, when the world was dark and people found the courage to light it again. Every year, when the children's laughter fades into the night and the air grows still, I sit on my porch beside that little lantern. I watch the flame flicker against the glass and think about that first Halloween, the smell of wood smoke, the glow of pumpkins, the sound of people daring to laugh again. And I whisper to no one and everyone, we made it back to the light. Because in the end, that's what it's always been about. Not ghosts, not tricks, not even the candy. It's about the light we carry through the years, the kind we pass to others when the world grows dim. That's why I keep lighting my lantern every October, not to remember the darkness, but to celebrate the courage it took to outshine it. Before you scroll away, take a moment to think about this. Sometimes the smallest lights we carry can outlast the darkest nights. If this story touched your heart, let it stay with you and help us keep that light alive. Leave a comment and tell us what this story reminded you of. Like the video to help it reach others who still believe in kindness. And subscribe to Back When Stories for more moments that remind us what truly matters. Because the past still whispers, and together we can keep listening.